Hello, good evening everyone. I hope I am audible. Can anyone just confirm?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So let us just start over. So initially we'll just go through a quick recap of whatever has been taught in the session over the past 2 weeks. So initially the session starts with around what is search and optimization, essentially how the basic aspects of what the decision variables are and how you have to choose them, and then you go about deciding what an objective function is, and then some of the constraints that what the constraints are and several types of constraints we are going to be discussing. So we'll just go through one quick example to understand how this is. So let's just consider one example. Say all of us will be using these Google Maps. We want to go from one particular location to another location. You need to identify the route. If this is an objective function, like this is your optimization problem, what could be the possible objective functions? One, if you can consider the travel distance. If you just see the travel distance, that could will it be a possible objective function or not? Is one of, like, anyone can just, you can feel free to just unmute yourself and just speak out if you know any of these. So essentially your objective function is anything which it is of your interest. If you consider the travel distance, for instance, if you say, it could be like you want to minimize your travel distance between two particular locations by, like, you have several possible routes. So all these routes will be your decision variables. Like you need to choose which type of transport. These are the parameters which you can control that will essentially count as your decision variables. Your objective function is your final ultimate goal. So you want to reach from A to B with minimum distance, then this could be one of your objective function. Or if you see, you also have another option, like you want to minimize your time, the time to travel from some location to some other location. Or you could possibly have now consider this particular option of mode of transportation. Mode of transportation is essentially your parameter that you are trying to control. It won't be any of your objective functions. Or if you are, you can also consider this option where you have fuel consumption in some vehicle. You want to minimize the fuel consumption. So these are some of the possible ways of seeing at the problem. Depending upon the type of your area, say if you are a pollution engineer or someone, your focus will be on trying to minimizing the fuel consumption. Say if you are working in designing an algorithm for a Google Maps, then your aim would be to minimize the total time. So, or if you're working on some Uber ride or something, their aim would be to minimize the travel distance. So these are all several possible objective functions. In this course, currently, like the past 2 weeks, the lectures talk about single objective functions. There are two classes of this. Like you can either have a single objective function or a multi-objective function. Essentially, single objective functions will have only one objective function. Like you want to either minimize the total time or you have to minimize the total distance. Then there is another class of problems which are multi-objective functions. Those are essentially like you want to have two contradicting objective functions. Say you want to minimize the total travel distance and also to minimize the total time and also to minimize the total fuel consumption. Such kinds of problems will be the kind of multi-objective functions which we'll be discussing later in the course. And then the professor discusses about some of the practical problems that you are encountering that you might encounter during normal optimization problems. The traditional optimization problems usually rely on some of the mathematical techniques. Like we might be knowing about the general way of finding the maximize. Say for example, you have some function f of x, and you want to minimize this function. You want to minimize this function f of x. The usual way to go about this is essentially you do dou f by dou x equal to 0, and you find out the value of f. This is the traditional way of going about the things. But now in practical scenarios, we usually have functions which are not continuous and which are not differentiable. So this type of approach is not always helpful. So like let us just take the example of the previous example where you want to travel from one particular point to another point. The travel time is essentially a function of so many parameters like your mode of transport or whatever routes you are taking, and it also depends upon the traffic condition. We cannot just write a function f of x which describes all these parameters in a continuous fashion. It is for those kinds of problems that we are interested in solving practically. We'll learn about the techniques how to do it. The next one is we have the search space which is either discontinuous or discrete. So for example, just consider the previous example. Now you have several routes. Your solution is like if you want to go from point A to point B, it's like you can go in all possible ways. Your search space is essentially the entire this particular, if you just assign a coordinate system over here, your search space will be some set of points x1 y1, and then you go to x2 y2 and so on till you reach xb comma yb. But in practical scenarios, what we usually encounter is a discrete space. We cannot essentially move over all possible combinations of this. There are only certain routes in which we can go. So this is what he meant by discontinuous or discrete search space. And then we have something called mixed variables, where we have a combination of variables which are both kind of discrete and continuous. One of the major problems we encounter during practical optimization is the large dimensional problems, which essentially you have so many parameters, so many decision variables that you have to take into account. Just consider the previous example. We have like a lot of traffic conditions and so many rules, local rules, and then there might be some parade going on, or then maybe some local restrictions as to the particular time, or then there you have to know whether it is a one way or other way. So all these kinds of things will be considered in these particular scenarios. So essentially one of the aim we are trying to do over here, like as the professor mentions in the recorded lecture, is like you want to reduce your dimensionality. So essentially he says that when you are choosing your decision variables, you want to choose them in such a way that you identify minimum possible set of variables that describes your problem. And then we have nonlinear constraints. Constraints are essentially like saying you have certain search space over which you are possibly searching. Say, consider here in this particular example, these are the possible 3 routes you can take. So these 3 routes will constitute your search space. And these are essentially your constraints. So essentially you're saying you can only move in either one of these 3 ways. You cannot move in any other way. So they kind of limit your search space to only 3. Like instead of searching over entire all possible combinations of x comma y, you're essentially limiting yourselves to these 3 particular constraints. Usually practically all the constraints will be nonlinear, in the way that nonlinear constraints are essentially like they depend again on one of your decision variables. Say in the previous traffic example, when we consider, you choose the route depending on your mode of transport. Like some particular routes are only accessible with some particular type. Say you can move only on particular road with only your motorbike. It is these kinds of constraints that we are calling nonlinear, and these are usually natural to occur in all the practical optimization problems. And another frequent problem is your multimodal functions. It is essentially like having, say, you have a function which has so many possible out. So these are called, there is a concept of local optima and global optima. All these are minimums. Minimums in the sense they are locally minimum. From our basic definition calculus, we know like if you have a function f of x, you can say like dou square f by dou x square. If this is greater than 0 at some particular point x naught, then x naught is said to be your local minima. Any functions of this sort will have so many local minimas. These are called multimodal functions. In order to our objective is to find the global optima. If our objective is find global optima, the traditional techniques of iterative methods will usually converge to one of these local optima, and we cannot guarantee a global optima solution. So this is another class of problems we are going to encounter during practical optimization. And another one which we previously discussed is a multiple objectives. So it's in all engineering scenarios you usually face several kinds of conflicting alternatives. So say suppose if you are dealing with some heat transfer phenomena, you want to have maximum heat transfer to occur with. If you want the maximum heat transfer, you need to have more surface area. Like you have essentially, if you consider a pipe, heat exchanger with a pipe as the fluid flows over it with some cross section A, your heat transfer will essentially increase if you increase the surface area. But as you know, we just can't do it like, even if you want to increase the the surface area, you are essentially if you want to increase this particular area with another pipe inside, one fluid flowing over here and another fluid flowing over here. So if you increase this particular area, you are likely to, like the area of the pipe, inner pipe, then you will essentially have more surface area, so your heat transfer will increase. But essentially it will lead to a reduction in this particular area, which will essentially increase your pressure drop. So your pumping power has to increase. So here you have two conflicting objectives. One, to increase the heat transfer, and second one, to decrease your pumping cost, both of which are contradicting to each other. So it is these kinds of problems that we will usually encounter in practice. So those are the topic of our interest in this particular course. And then there is uncertainty in these variables, which essentially means you have certain variables, like that when you have chosen that this is your parameters or these are your decision variables, all of these variables you cannot know with certainty. All of them will have like if you are performing some experiments, you will not know them for sure. Like there will be certain limit to the instrument precision, and there are always some random errors which occur which limit the certainty of a variable. Or even if you consider the previous example of a traffic, you do not actually know the exact position of the particular vehicle at that point of time. There might be some time lags, or there might be some instrumental level, like the accuracy is within certain kilometers or certain meters. Like there will always be a circle of influence within which only you know, up to that accuracy you know the location of that particular vehicle. These are another problems that we need to encounter, and the most usually commonly encountered problem is their computational expensive. All these techniques require huge computational effort. Like consider the previous example, like if you want to simulate some traffic, you need to know all the vehicles data, you need to populate them, and you need to kind of evaluate dynamically, get this data, like update this data. All this requires huge computational efforts, and all these problems are multidisciplinary in the sense, like if you are a heat transfer expert and you need to be a fluid expert, and then you need to come, like if you consider the traffic example before, you need to be like communications in the sense to get data from GPS, and then you need to be a computer science engineer to kind of design an algorithm to optimize all of this. So all of these requires effort from several disciplines together. And then professor discusses about the problem formulation. Problem formulation is essentially whatever we have thought subjectively, we need to convert it into a mathematical form so that the computer can understand it. So just to put it in perspective, the basic definition here, x is our decision variable. X is essentially, it can be a single value, like x can be single variable, or it can be a vector of so many parameters, x1, x2, so on, up to xn, where n is the dimensionality of our problem. These are subject to certain constraints. These we call them inequality. These are gj greater than or equal to 0 are essentially your inequality constraints, and then you have equality constraints which are very rigid in the sense, and then you have bounds to the variation. As you can see, these bound variables can actually be formulated in another way. You can actually reformulate them as inequality constraints. So essentially when you have xi of L less than or equal to xi, you can formulate it as xi minus xi of L less than or equal to 0. So this is essentially another inequality constraint. So these are kind of interchangeable constraints. You can formulate them in another way, but we will usually employ techniques to the variable bounded types are easy to implement than the inequality constraints. We will see how it is done. The basic steps in optimization are, first you need to come up with your need for optimization. In the previous example, our objective is to minimize the travel time for Google Maps or any other that particular application. And then we come up with a problem formulation. This is essentially formulating the problem from human language to mathematical formulation. Here the first step is in identifying the problem parameters. Like in the previous example, our parameters are the things which you can control, like the route, choosing the route. Once choosing the route is one of them, and mode of transport, all those things will be constituting the problem parameters. Once we identify all the problem parameters, the things which we can control, or there are so many parameters which might be interdependent. from that we need to identify those which we can control that are independent of each other. Once this subset of parameters are identified, we label them as design variables. After the design variables are decided, then we go about formulating the constraints. These constraints are like, it depends on the application. Say for the previous case, your constraints are essentially the possible routes you can take or the possible modes of transport that are available to you at that particular point of time. Depending on your time, only say you want to take a local train and your time is around 2 p.m. or something, like 2 a.m. in the morning, then a local train is not available, then that particular route is not an option. These are the kind of constraints that you have to put in a mathematical way. And then we formulate our objective function, which is essentially minimizing the total time to move from one point to another point. And we then set up our variable bounds. After the problem is formulated, we come up with a problem for, we actually do the optimization, like we decide which algorithm to use. There are several algorithms, like we can use any calculus based algorithms or we can use some heuristic based algorithms, which are essentially like, they are not, all algorithms won't be working for all sorts of problems. It depends on your problem of application. That once it's chosen, like we choose one particular algorithm and try to obtain a solution from it, and then we'll check whether the feasibility of that particular solution, and then we again try to reformulate our problem and rerun till it is till the solution obtained is up to our reasonable expectations. We'll just solve one of these problems. So if once we formulate it, this is another problem that is discussed by the professor, like they call it the duality principle. So you want to minimize some function small f of x, and then you want to, that is essentially equivalent to maximizing some capital F of x. So what is the relation between capital F of x and small f of x? As you can see, there are two particular options here. You can either choose capital F of x equal to 1 by f of x. If you choose this particular option, it's like whenever you're trying to minimize small f of x, your capital F of x will be increasing. So you can do that is one way of doing it. The other option is like you can essentially put a negative over it. So minimizing small f of x is essentially equivalent to maximizing capital F of x. The one which is usually used in practice is the second option. Capital F of x is minus f of x. Why we are not using capital F of x is essentially because of your division operator is much more costlier than your negation operator, and then you also have the feature like there are cases where small f of x might go to 0 and which cannot be to that, like the precision of that might be not good. Say suppose you want to minimize some f of x and f of x value is 0, so or you want to maximize something, then that particular thing just goes to infinite and it is not possible to represent that quantity using numerical in a computer in a digital format. So we usually use the second option. And then we come up with nature inspired techniques. This course essentially revolves around using nature inspired techniques. So we'll just go through some of these options. Can any one of you try to explain which of these options better describes what is meant by nature inspired techniques?
This C or B or C, maybe both.
Can you just elaborate, like just for the benefit of others?
As we have, I mean, it goes through natural selection, then survival of fittest, multiple, the ways how we transfer good genes to the offspring. That is what some algorithms based on evolution techniques are.
Yeah.
They borrow it from there.
Yeah, thank you. So essentially we see over the first two options, like we'll just go through all the options. The first option is the copying the natural processes. As Sanjay has pointed out, you essentially have, first is your information needs to be encoded in some particular format, and then you have the survival of the fittest. So that is essentially saying you first encode your information and then it goes through a selection operator where only the good ones will get selected and the bad ones will gradually get eliminated. So copying the nature process is like essentially duplicating whatever is happening in the nature in entirety. Say we consider the genetics as the Darwinian principle says, so consider a human being, we have lot of genes. Each gene will, like we have a genotype, phenotype. So each gene has a certain structure which has some observable phenomenon at a large scale. Say we'll consider the color of our iris. The color of iris is dictated by a particular genome sequence. So we are not duplicating entirely what is actually happening in nature. We are not actually duplicating what the genes and then trying to understand how genes interact and how they gradually come up to the extent of giving color to the iris. This is not our aim. Our aim is essential to understand and apply the actual core principles. So encoding, we can do it. The basic principles are encoding and survival of the fittest. So how do we encode it? This is essentially what they are called mimicking the natural processes. We are not copying them, but we are kind of getting inspired from them and adopting them, only the major ones that are helpful to us. The professor also discusses about the generalized framework for any evolutionary computation technique. So the first step in this is in getting the solution representation. This is what we discussed about previously, that is the genetics. This is your encoding. This is how the information is encoded in some particular format. There are several ways which you can represent, like for our case, let us consider the previous example. If you want to say you want to move from A to B, you have 3 particular routes. How do you encode the information for this particular route? How do you say your like this is route 1, route 2, route 3? This solution representation is essentially saying like how do you represent 1, 2, 3 in a way that a computer can understand, and at the same time that way should differentiate 1 and 2 and 3. One possible way to represent it is like going through a set of points and giving x comma y of all these points. We will discuss like the professor, the next second week lectures, if you have gone through the second week of lectures, there we have discussed about binary coded GA, where the professor uses binary coding to represent this, to represent all the possible solutions. And then we will subsequently be discussing what real encoding is and other types of encodings. So in general, solution representation is essentially trying to represent one of your possible solutions in a way the computer understands. Once you have come up with a representation for your solution, the next step is identifying your initializing your random population. In genetics, we usually have some random, it is a population based method, in the sense like you have several solutions and you do not, you have a selection operator. It's like you have a sieve or it's a filter. You have several population solutions which are made to pass through a filter. Only the good ones will pass through the filter. But the problem with this filter is its sizes are not uniform. The size of the pore inside the filter is a random variable. So not only the good ones come out, sometimes even the bad solutions will pass through the filter. So it is stochastic in nature. So you might be getting good as well as bad solutions, but as you do it number of times, eventually you will be eliminating all the bad solutions and you will only be getting the good solutions. This is the main principle behind it. Is similar to how the evolution happens over on our earth. So just similar to the initial how the life started with cyst and algae and how we are right now, or you can consider any other evolution for that sake, how it is gradually increasing over time. Next step is in calculating the objective constraints and assigning a fitness. So here we have 3 particular terms. Objective is essentially your choice of interest. Constraints are essentially the ones which will limit your search space. Basically, it is the ones like it is basically the kind of traffic rules which tells you like you can only go in this particular way and not the other way. Those are the constraints. And then we call something called fitness. This fitness is essentially the one that is important, and we need to it's the kind of the size of the pore inside the filter. We are essentially telling for the selection operator to work properly, we need to tell which one is the better than other. So you have 3 possible alternative routes here in this figure, like 1, 2 and 3. We need to have we need to somehow measure how 1 is different from 2 and different from 3. Say for example, if we need to just measure the shortest distance between A and B, then we can, as we can see from here, like 2 is the one which is kind of the shortest distance. So this fitness should be some kind of measure which is proportional to the distance between A and B. If it is your time, then you need to formulate your fitness in such a way that it is different from it. This fitness should be inclusive of both objective and constraint functions. It will be discussed in subsequent weeks about this in detail. And then next we will go through an iterative algorithm. So what we essentially do, we will fix our generation and then we apply our selection operator. So here we, after applying the fitness functions, we will just select the ones that are fit to pass for the next generation, and then we come across variation operators. Basically two variation operators are discussed in our lectures, like crossover and mutation operator. We will be solving some problems on how to do this. Once we obtain the new offsprings, so then we again calculate the fitness for the new offsprings, and out of these we again apply another strategy called survivor. From that we obtain the solutions which will go for the next generation, and this process repeats till either the maximum generation is reached or till your convergence. This is essentially you call a convergence criteria. There can be two possible ways. You can actually say, like, if capital T is my total number of generations, say you put a limit saying 100 number of generations I want. That could be one way of defining convergence. There are other ways as well. You can actually say if the solutions are not changing over time. Say for example, if you have some possible set of solutions with the following fitness values, say like 1, 1, 1, 1, all these fitness values are 1 at generation 1. And as you go to generation 2, the values are changing to around say 1.5, 1.5, 1.4, 1.3, and as it goes, gradually all of them are becoming like 1.5, 1.4, 2.0, 2.1, and then 2.00, 2.00, 2.00, or something like that. So essentially these particular values, there is no change between these values. You can actually put a constraint on this saying like you can actually define your convergence criteria in such a way that whenever the change within the population as you go from one generation to the next generation is not improving that much, you can also put a convergence criteria saying if this limit is within less than some particular constant, you just stop iterating. That could be one possible way of defining your convergence criteria. Next we discuss about binary coded genetic algorithms. Here we will just see some basic examples about the basic conversions, about how do you convert from binary to decimal. This is a quick refreshing view of, let's just consider one example. You have a number like a string. This is a binary string 10111. If you want to convert it to decimal, what we essentially do over here is like you consider one by one. Each of these will be given an index position 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and this index position will be given the power of that particular number 2 cube and 2 power 4, and you essentially multiply these numbers here. So it's like 1 into 2 power 0 plus 1 into 2 power 1 plus 1 into 2 square plus 0 into 2 cube, 0 into 2 cube plus 1 into 2 power 4. That gives you a 23. So this is how you convert from binary to decimal. And if you want to do it the other way around, say like you want to convert from decimal to binary, you essentially say if you have 24, the nearest perfect square is 16. So you have 16. Then you have to cover up for the balance. The next number, like you see 23, then you come up with 16. Then the difference is around 7. So for this 7, you have the nearest number is 4. The difference is 3. The nearest number is 2. For 2, the difference is like you need to cover up 2. So the difference 1 is essentially your 1, 2 power 0. So you kind of have 2 power 4 plus 2 square plus 2 power 1 plus 2 power 0. Since 4 is the maximum power, you need to have 5 places where you can fill these things. So you take up these coefficients and fill this one by one, so you get back the original number in the binary form. Just quickly go through it. So this is the same example. So now let's solve this particular problem. So here we have something called a chromosome length. Chromosome length is essentially the length of this particular string we are considering over here. In this particular case 10111, your chromosome length will be 5. I'll just keep the question for a few minutes, so I think you will get some time to solve it yourself and come up with one of the solution. Maybe I'll wait for a couple of minutes for you to solve this question. Here just to briefly describe the question, it's like you have one decision variable x, which the bounds of value x are between 1 and 5, and you have a chromosomal length of 4. You are using chromosomes of you are using a binary string of length 4 to encode this variable. So if my binary string is 1011, what is the actual value of x? I'll just wait for one more minute to see if anyone of you comes up with your answer.
I didn't get it. It's simply we have to convert this binary to decimal, is it?
No, no, not essentially. So if you convert it to binary to decimal, see you have here something called bounds for the variable. You have one variable which is between 1 and 5. First you convert into, you do some encoding, and then you actually convert that to binary. This is that final binary string which is used in the algorithm. So first step is converting that to decimal, and this particular value, the first step, once you convert it to decimal, what you get over here is the decoded value of that particular string. But if you see the decoded value, if you just convert to decimal, it is around 11. But you know the variable bounds are only between 1 and 5. So 11 couldn't be the answer.
So 5.
So you're saying it's a 5. So can you just explain?
First position, the 0th index we have to leave because our bound is 1 to 5. Right?
So you're saying, if you consider 1011, we will leave the, if you have this 1011, you are essentially saying we will leave this one. Is it that way?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but I have told you the chromosomal length is 4. So I have to use 4 bits continuously.
So, okay, the bound is 1 to 5, which means total 5.
Bound is 1 to 5 is essentially the original variable, your decision variable. Your decision variable can vary between 1 to 5. Say, let me just give you an example. If you consider some function f of x equal to some x square, let's just consider a simple example. F of x equal to x square. I need to find, my objective is to minimize this function x square. We just plot f of x square. It will be something like this. And I am saying x varies between 1 and 5. So this is my x and this is my f of x. This is my y and this is my f of x equal to x square. Now if x ranges between 1 and 5, your minimum, as you can see from the graph, minimum occurs at around 1. So here we start with saying chromosomal length of 4 and my string is 1011. So what we do, we'll just go through one example. So first you convert it to decimal, you get a decoded value of 11. The next thing is this. What you essentially do is scale that particular variable between lower limit and upper limit. So it is 11. So for example, if you consider 1011, you essentially have 4 values. So the maximum value this particular string, binary string, can take is 2 power 0. If all are ones, that is the maximum possible value that this particular variable can take. So 1 into 2 power 0 plus 1 into 2 power 1 plus 1 into 2 square plus 1 into 2 cube. So this comes around, this is essentially 2 power 4 minus 1, so that is 15. So the maximum value a binary string of length 4 can take is 15 and the minimum value it can take is 0. So if you are using a chromosomal length of 4, you can essentially take values between 0 and 15. Now what we are essentially trying to do is we are using a string which can map between 0 to 15 and somehow this has to map between 1 and 5. So we need to convert from 0, 15 to 1, 5. And you can, this formula is essentially that. So if, just to put things in perspective, let us say 0 and dv is my decoded value, 15 is my scale value, and then I have lower limit as 1, upper limit as 5, and x is your given value, that the decoded value of the decision variable. What you are essentially saying is like you are assuming a linear relationship between them. So x minus 1 by dv minus 0 is essentially equivalent to 5 minus 1 by 15 minus 0. This is essentially the same. Both are essentially the same. You can use this formula to calculate, like once you substitute it, you get an x of around 3.93.
So do we have to understand how to come up with this formula?
Not really. You need not have to come up with this formula. This is actually one linear interpolation. This is just one approach. You can just directly use this formula. I'm just trying to explain like this is how they come up with that formula. Is something not clear in this derivation? I can explain it again. You want me to explain again?
Not the derivation. I was worrying if in further ahead in the course, if we have to again come up with certain formulas to convert
No, not real. No.
these boundary problems, right?
No.
Okay.
No. This is a standard one.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So for this particular case, we have the answer as 4. Like I've just rounded it off 3.93 to 4. Yeah, just for the previous case, I think we have heard about the decision precision. Yeah, can you? I think it is fine. Can you just explain what precision is meant? Anyone of you?
So we had encoded 11,
Hmm.
but we got some other value, right?
Yeah, we got some value that ranges between 1 and 5.
Yeah. So I don't know. I have not gone through week 2 contents yet, but just I mean.
Yeah, you can just go around saying like general meaning of what a precision is.
So how accurate we are, how far we are from the truth.
Actually, that's not close. It's basically like how many decimal points you are accurate up to. Yeah.
Computational representation is the way you
Yeah.
are telling. Yeah.
So for the previous particular example, you are essentially saying if you want to represent between 1 and 5, till what accuracy you can kind of come about. Say like between 1 and 5, can I say 1.2222345? Like how many decimal places can I actually go to? That is what your precision tells. This is the formula they are using. Like you essentially have limits between 1 and 5, and to represent this 1 and 5, you are essentially using 0 to 15. So the precision you will get is like the whatever is the range of this divided by what is the range you are using to encode that particular information. Sorry, 15 minus 0. That gives the precision. The precision is around 0.26, which essentially means this again your comes up your problem of discrete space. So you're essentially using a real variable. Like for the previous case, you have a real variable f of x equal to x square, y is like x square, which is a real function. But what happens when you try to use a chromosomal length of 4 is essentially you are kind of limiting it to this particular space of 0.26. So now your values will be like 1, 1.26, 1.52 and so on. So if your solution is something in between these two, you will never know the actual value. You will just either come up with either this or this as a solution. This is something like you are discretizing your space. Now, usually in practical engineering problems, what we have is when you measure some experimental variable, or say if you are going in your car, the velocity, the speedometer if you use, the velocity that it gives, all these things will have some defined precision. Say if you are using some thermocouple for measuring temperature, or if you use a thermometer for some temperature, it will give you only up to like 0.1 degree centigrade or 1 degree centigrade. So you know beforehand what is the precision, what precision is required for that particular application. So now, if we formulate the question just in the other way around, say if I need a precision of 0.1, what should be the length of chromosome for that particular application? So using just the above formula, we can reformulate it. It's like if we rearrange this particular the precision formula, we will get around the length of the chromosome. So it happens like if you want an accuracy of around if you want a precision of around 0.1, you need to have a chromosome of length 6. Yeah, this is just another quick problem. So we have 4 decision variables. Consider them to be x1, x2, x3 and x4. All of them are varying between 0 and 1. And my solution is something like I have obtained one of the solutions. Like during one of my iterations, I came up with this particular solution as 0.5, 0.4, 0.2 and 0.6. Now I need to convert it into a binary string so that I can feed my computer for the next steps. So maybe I'll wait for a couple of minutes for you to solve this problem. These are some of your options. Yeah, note that the chromosomal lengths are not same for all the possible options. Like if you see, the first variable has only 4, second variable is 3, third one and fourth one are again 4. This is usually the practice. When you have several variables, you do not require all of them with the same precision. Then we can actually use multiple chromosomal lengths for each one of them. I'll wait for just a minute to see if anyone. I hope the process is clear to how to go about. Like initially we convert the original values to decoded values. And once we get the decoded values, we'll convert it from decimal to binary. Just to give, this is a formula for decoded values. If you just want to try it yourself. Just solve for each of these variables. Just come up with these decoded values. Once you get the decoded values, you convert them into decimal number. From decimal to binary using the previous, like if you want to convert 7 to binary, what you essentially do is like 4 plus 2 plus 1. So this essentially boils down to 2 power 0. Like this is the coefficient of, this is 2 power 0, 2 power 1 and 2 square. 2 power 0, 2 power 1, 2 square. But since I have said the first one is a variable length for chromosomal length is 4, I need to have another bit here which we don't have any value, so we essentially keep 0. And then when you come up with 3 is essentially 2 plus 1 is like 1, 1, but I have set a chromosomal length of 3, so the first bit will be 0. And you have 3 again here, but if you see here, we have a chromosomal length of 4, so I need 4 bits. So 1, 1 and the remaining 2 will be 0. And when you have 9 is essentially like 8 plus 1. So here you again have 4 bits. First one, the remaining second one like 2 power 1, 2 square or 0 and then 2 cube will be 1. Now you represent them in the binary format. So your final string will be like a combination of all these things. So So your final string will be like 0 1 0 1 1 0 0 1 1 1 0 0 1. This is the input that will be going to your computer. Next step will be in like selection operators. Like previously we have discussed about the survival of the fittest. That essentially what it essentially means is to identify the fittest, the ones that are better than others. So there are several operators you can use for this. The course, yeah, if you can go through the recorded lectures, there will be two prominent ones. One will be the tournament selection, other one will be fitness proportionate selection. So both of these methods, we will just discuss how to solve the problems for those methods. Or if you have already gone through the lecture, you can just try this out. Now consider this function f of xy equal to x square into x plus y, and you know that these are the four possible solutions. In the sense, this is my population at that particular point of time. These four samples are present in my population, and my objective is to maximize this function. During tournament selection, the first step is essentially to identify the possible pairs, which we usually done randomly. So if we label them like the first one as, this is just for your case. So I have four variables like A, B, C, D are my four samples in the population with the x and y values as follows. And this is your f of xy. If you calculate x square and x plus y, you are getting these. And my operator is basically a binary selection operator. So I am choosing two at a time. So if at first instance, if I have chosen A and C, second time I will be choosing B and D. So if I have chosen A and B for a maximization problem, what would be the result of tournament selection? Can any one of you just unmute and answer it? I hope the question is clear.
Can you please repeat the binary tournament selection again?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So in this particular operation, what you do is once you have the population, you randomly select two solutions from them and you compare both of them. So based on your problem, say if you want to maximize something, you see the fitness values of both the solutions. Which one of them is the one which is having the larger value is your output of the operator. And then you again repeat it. Now say suppose you have 8 solutions. Say you have 1, 2, 3, 4 as your solutions. First you pick 2 at a random, say 2 numbers at random, say 2 and 4, and then you pick these two are done, and then you take another 2 at a random, say 5 and 3, and then again you come up with 2 other numbers, 7 and 1 and 6 and 8. So for each of this binary selection essentially means you are selecting 2 at a time. Once you select 2 at a time, then you perform the operator. If you want to maximize, then you select the maximum of this. If it is 2 and 4, you essentially select 4. 5 and 3, you select 5. 7 and 1, you essentially select 1. 6 and 8, you select 8. If your problem is if minimization is your interest, you just do the opposite. I hope it is clear.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so for this particular case, if you can see, like we started out with the population number of size 8, but then we got only 4 solutions here. As you can see, like the algorithm works in this particular way, like the population size will remain constant throughout. That is not essentially the case, but usually the population size will remain constant. So if you want to obtain 8 solutions, you just again start over. Again, you pick 2 at a random from all the possible solutions, and then you just keep on repeating till you get your required population size. So for this particular case, when I'm choosing A and C, and my objective is to get maximization, or if you want maximization, then A will be my solution. So like if you can see, these are the possibles here. If you want maximization, A will be the answer, and in the second case, B will be the max. Or it can be the other way around. You can have a minimization scenario where C and D will be your solutions. This is one form of selection operator. There are some challenges, like you can actually have three. I mean, here we have used binary selection, but there are other possibilities. In general, you call it K tournament selection. And this K is the size of your size of samples among whom the tournament or the match happens. So if you have, say for example, K equal to 3, in the previous example, instead of selecting 2, you will be taking 3. That's going to be the only difference. Now let's go to the next type of selection operator, that is the fitness proportionate selection. Here what we are saying, once we calculate all the fitness, we kind of attribute probabilities to each of these fitnesses, and we select only those having maximum probability. So we'll just go through one example that makes things clear. So consider this example. Say I have a population like with 8 samples, and these are my fitness values. The first step I need to come up with is determine the probabilities of each of these fitnesses. So say if I represent fitness with f of I and my probability with p of I and cumulative probability with capital P of I, let's put some other variable, say h of I for cumulative probability. First step is for calculating probability Pi. What we essentially do is Fi by sigma Fi. So this kinds of tells you the proportional weight you have to give for that particular fitness over all possible fitness values in that particular population. So in this particular example, you will be if you do this particular step, you will be getting the probabilities as this, and then you obtain cumulative probability. Cumulative probability is essentially like, if you want Hi, is essentially Pi plus Hi minus 1. Just for I equal to 1 is Hi equal to Pi. So it is simply like, you just take this first step here. For calculating this, you add this plus this. For calculating this, you take up this plus this. Again, to calculate this, you add both of this. So you just go on till the end, and finally you will get a value of 1. Like, all possible solutions should sum up to 1. This is the first step in fitness proportionality. Once you obtain the cumulative probabilities, the next step is kind of you generate random values. You generate random numbers depending on the size of your population. If you have a population size of 8, you generate 8 random numbers. Once you generate 8 random numbers, you need to use those numbers to select the samples from this particular population. I'll just go through how that is done. I'll just go through the basic idea behind this selection procedure. Usually we use these random numbers are generated from uniform distribution. I hope you are uniform distribution. You are aware of uniform distribution. Can you just confirm?
Is it Gaussian distribution?
No. Uniform distribution is essentially I hope you are clear about the PDF, the probability distribution function. So for a uniform distribution, you have a constant probability distribution function. So all numbers between 0 and 1 have uniform probability, like same probability of occurring. For a Gaussian distribution, you'll be having a different kind of PDF, something like this.
Yeah.
So here you are more like, this essentially says you are more likely to encounter this particular value. Like if this is your X, you are more likely to get values of around this than this. A uniform distribution is the other extreme of it, where it's not an extreme. It's like basically you are saying all are equally probable. Like you can get all values of X with
So
equal probability.
variance is 0 or
Variance is essentially not 0. Your variance will be depending on your number of samples. Like if you take 100 samples from between 0 to 1, if you're, say I'll just give one example. Say if my chosen value is 0 to 1, if I'm taking from uniform distribution like 100 values, all of these values will be like, if I just plot a histogram of all these values, it will be more or less like this, between 0 to 1. But if I'm using a Gaussian distribution, it will be something like this. Like if you use a Gaussian distribution with mean 0.5, most of the values will occur at 0.5. So your here also there is a variance. It's not it's if your variance is essentially 0, you are getting only 1 point. So like between 0 and 1, if you are getting only 0.5, then your variance is 0. But in a uniform distribution, you get other values also. Like you get 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, but you get equal. How many times you get 0.4? You get similar number of times 0.2 as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So is like tossing the coin, let's say 100 times. After they say, right, after some certain number of, after 32 times or something, somehow the probability of head or tails becomes equal 0.5. Is it the same thing concept you're talking about?
Conceptually, they are quite different. So uniform distribution is essentially like this is a continuous distribution. The one you are referring to is like this. So if you toss a coin, you will either get a tails or a head. Both are with equal probability.
Yeah.
So if you just if you just plot the distribution of it, it will be like you either get 0 or you get 1. So it will be either one of these. Like if you say 0 is your heads and 1 is your tails, you get either 0 or 1. You won't get anything in between.
Okay.
You just convert it into a continuous case.
No, but here also
Yeah, both are with equal probability. Yeah, that is for a discrete case.
okay. So in the continuous case, what I didn't understand is why you have so many variables, so many values, because as you said, it will be same probability, any number of recurrences, right? But
What I meant to say, I'll just give one example. Say you have uniform random variable between 0, 1. You generate 10 samples or say 100 samples. So it will be something like this. You get 0.1 like 10 times. You get 0.2 like 10 times. 0.3 10 times. Something like this.
okay.
So this is what I meant by equal probability. So like essentially the similar numbers will come up.
Okay.
All the numbers will be coming up similar number of times.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Got it? Okay.
Yeah.
So here what we do in this fitness proportionate selection is first we generate these uniform random variables. These will be ranging between 0 to 1. We generate the number of random variables should be equal to the number of your population, like your sample size. We call this a sample size. So here if we have 8, we generate 8 random variables. The next step is essentially like you see, say for this, let's start with this particular one. These are the 8 random variables I have generated. So if you see the first number is 0.56. Now what we do, from this cumulative probability table, we will see where this particular range is. If you see 0.56 is somewhere between these two, 0.383 and 0.757. So if you can just split this thing, so from 0 to 1, 0.162 is where your 1 happens. 0.355 from here, 0.355 is where your second one comes. 0.383 is quite close to second one, so 3 comes here. 0.757 is somewhere around here. Here comes 4. 0.776 is close to it. Here comes 5. 0.813 is again close to it. Comes 6. 0.888 is again close to that. So it is 7. And 1 is your 8. So if you can see over here, you have kind of distributed from 0 to 1 in this particular fashion. Like your population fashion is in this particular way. So if you have more number of, like if you generate more samples from this, if you see between 3 and 4, it is more likely to occur. Like more number of samples will be between 3 and 4. So if my random variable is 0.56, 0.56 is essentially lies between this and this. Like if you see the values here, instead of writing 1, 2, 3, let me just write the values here. It's like 1.162, 0.355, 0.383, 0.757, 776. This is 813. 888. So my random variable is 0.56, which falls between 0.383 and 0.757. So it is somewhere between this and this. So this is like between, it is after 3 and between 4. So this is the area where 4 is likely to come. So we choose 4 as our option. Now if the next random number is 0.23. So 0.23 is essentially between this and this. So it's like between 1 and 2. So we choose the second one, like we choose the other extreme, 2. It's like you can go with any one of them, like you just follow it consistently. If you're choosing the left one, do it consistently. If you're choosing the right one, do the same for all of them. And then next comes 0.36. 0.36 is essentially between these two. So you select the right one, again 3. So this goes on and you have all these values. So these are your these will go to the next generation. So here you are essentially having 4, 3 times 2, you are getting 3 times 3, you are getting 1 time, and 8 you are getting 1 time. So you are essentially got all your 8 solutions that can go, like this 8 is equal to your population size. The main idea here is this: if you see the probability here, this probability, what it essentially says is the proportion of the fitness among it is like, if you see all the values here, 52, 62, 9, 120, this is the maximum value. Like if probability is higher, which means it is actually having a much more proportion in the entire population. Within the population, this is the solution having this is the solution that has a greater weightage that it has to be given. This is the same thing that is reflected even in this figure. You see this particular figure. In this figure, the area is the kind of weightage you are giving to that particular one. So if you see this particular area between 0.383 and 0.757 is the largest one, and that corresponds to this 120, the largest one. So if you continuously generate random variables, more numbers will, like this area is proportional to the number of generated numbers that will fall in that category. So most likely, if you continuously generate random numbers, more numbers will fall between 0.383 and 0.757 as compared to 0 and 0.162. So by using these random numbers, you can see here as well, 4 got selected 3 times and 4 is your 120. So 120 got selected 3 times. So your good selection is getting, like we spoke about it previously, like through the filter only the good solutions will pass and the bad ones will gradually get eliminated. So 120 is a good solution, and it is kind of had 3 copies of itself to the next generation. So from 1 copy, it is kind of getting 3 copies. So it is getting better and better. Again,
I have one.
Yeah.
So I have one question. Is there a possibility that the one with the highest fitness never gets come into distribution? What you showed down, right? Is it possible?
It's possible. See,
then
you can just
choose the
consider
next one, is it?
Yeah. If yeah, that can also happen. So if if all your random numbers somehow, like that can also happen, but the probability of happening that is less.
So does that mean our random function is not good?
No.
No.
It is just like
uniform
this.
random.
No, it doesn't mean anything. This is something what you call a stochasticity. What happens is you essentially want to have good solutions, but at the same time you don't want to, like, you just don't know if 120 is your actual solution. Your actual solution might be something like 180 or something. 120 is something what we referred previously called the local optima.
Yeah.
So we'll come across the other 2 operators, variation operators called crossover and mutation, that essentially tries to kind of have like, here selection operator is kind of giving you to just this some random basis to select some of them. But what you're essentially doing here is you are increasing the probability that a good one will go to the next strategy. That's it.
Yeah.
You're not essentially making it continuously go to it. You're sending it with some probability.
Okay. So how much good is good? That's the question, right? So what you are saying is whatever is the among this iteration, whichever was the highest score, that is the good.
That has more probability to go to the next one compared to the other solutions.
Okay.
Yeah, now as you pointed out, like you can see here with this particular operator, if instead of 120, my number is 1200 or something, just for sake of clarity, let's say if this number instead of 120 is like 1200, then this probability would be very much high. I mean, it will be too high that all these numbers will essentially, like, If you see this plot, this essentially becomes something like this. Zero will start somewhere here. All these small things will come here, and 1200 will occupy larger part, and the remaining things will come here. If something like that happens, most of your numbers will anyway fall between these things. So that particular thing, instead of getting 3 copies, 1200 might get all 7 copies, and like 1200 will get some 7 copies. 1 second. Might get 7 copies, and some other number might just get 1 copy. Or it can happen that 1200 will get all the 8 copies also. If something like this happens, then you will actually get converged to something called, like, it can either be the global optima or it can be local optima, but you are not actually spanning your search space enough. Like, there are two things. You are essentially kind of exploring your search space. Here your search space is essentially your x variable. This is your
So
f of
does
x.
it mean our parameter what we chose may need to be adjusted so that
Yeah,
to come
you
out
have to
of
tune
this?
it. Yeah,
Otherwise we'll
depending on
stuck
your
with,
application.
yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
based on your application, you need to kind of tweak here and there to see whether it is actually going to local or not, or is it global or something like that.
Thank you.
Okay. This is one disadvantage with this particular, but if you have seen the previous operator like tournament selection, there you wouldn't have this problem of going to one particular, like preferring one particular over other. Here the problem arises essentially because of this particular operation where you are kind of giving relative weightage over that particular population. So one of them, if the one of the values of this P of I is much larger compared to other values, you go and select that value more often than others. So the selection operator is just like the filter, but the next operator is your variation operators. Variation operators, you essentially have two classes of operators, crossover and mutation. So for the filter to work properly, like previously when we have discussed, like selection operator will give you the fittest ones, but after getting the fittest ones, you need to go to the next generation. You can't just use the same ones. If you use the same ones, keep on using the same ones continuously, you will go to one local optima. So you need some operator to kind of expand your search space. That is where crossover and mutation come. Crossover will essentially take two different solutions and try to identify some of these features from, like, it tries to mix and match the features from both the parameters and come up with a new offspring. It's similar to genetics. Like, you have two particular chromosomes, and during the cell division, like, the chromosomes get attached, like the information get exchanged between two chromosomes. So if you have something like one chromosome here, another chromosome here, so you have a different chromosome here. I'm just using different color. So when both of them combine, you essentially get a mix of both of them. Something like this. By using this mix and match, you are kind of exploring your search space. Now instead of using just these two values, you are kind of having some new value. At this new value, again you apply the selection operator, then you get to know whether the new value is good or not. In crossover operator, again we have two different types. We'll just go one by one. The first type of way is single point crossover operator. So you have a chromosome, say you have a binary string of length, say L equal to 8. You essentially have 8 bits. Some number, we'll just use this number 1 0 0 1 0 0 1 0. First step is, even in this particular case, you need to identify where to do this crossover. Like, you have, for the crossover to happen, you need two parents. So you have another number 1 0 0 1. So in single point crossover, first step is in identifying the split point that we choose randomly. So first we randomly generate one number between 0, like this is like 0 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. We generate a number between 0 and 7. Once we get that particular number, we split this thing. So here if I got a number like 5, so I am choosing my number as 5. So what I do is split at location 5. And then crossover is essentially exchanging, if you see in this particular figure, it's like exchanging the red with blue, or red with black. So it's the same thing here, we exchange both of them. So this yellow string on the top comes to the bottom, and the bottom one goes to the top.
So these two what I should say, chromosomes, right? For
Yeah.
for crossover which you picked, these are on the because only the D, not D, the fourth index was surviving, right? But does it mean we had some other index chromosome also available that time when you did crossover?
No, this is just one, like when you have a population, say in this previous example, you have really 8 samples, right? In these
Okay,
8
at this
samples,
iteration
it is
we had
one
8.
sample.
Okay.
It is one of these.
Okay.
This 100 is, say, suppose A or B or only one of
Yeah.
that. This
Yeah.
we operate for all of them separately. Like after this, you have seen previously we have selected like 4, 2, 3, 2 from this old index. Say we will again choose 2 at random. So we will pick 4 and 2. Then this is my 4.
Okay.
This is my 2.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again I generate another number that will be 5. So I will decide to split at 5. Then I'll exchange between both of them. Now if you see one of our previous examples, I just showed about how to decode the values and represent these numbers. Yeah, if you see this particular value, you have actually here four decision variables: x1, x2, x3, x4. So you come up with only one particular one string to represent all these 4 variables. So when you do when you have 2 solutions of, say, this 0.5, 0.4, 0.2, 0.6 is one solution, and you come up with another solution like 0.1, 0.3, 0.4 and 0.2, that will have another string of this sort. So what you are doing when you do crossover between this solution and the for this particular you get some other solution. So this versus this, when you do crossover, you come up with another 2 particular possible solutions. This will actually represent two different values of x1, x2, x3, x4. This is what. But if you see here, this when you do the crossover, you're not just doing for single variable. Like you're not doing crossover for x1 separately, x2 separately, x3 or x4 separately. You're essentially doing all at once. So if you see here, when you are splitting over here, all these values are unchanged. Only certain values are getting changed. The previous values are not getting changed. So only certain like out of x1, x2, x3, x4, some of these will get changed, some of these might not get changed.
That is again based on randomly we are.
That is also random. Yeah. So we are. This is what they call stochastic. No, you always go random. If you just do the swapping, this is what you get. The second kind of operator is kind of try to minimize this. Like we have 2-point crossover. In this, what we essentially do is, instead of selecting 1 point, previously we have chosen only one random, fifth site as random. Now we will choose 2 points, say second and sixth. So we split it at second and sixth. The middle one we will exchange. You can extend the same idea to multi-point crossover, where you have more than 2 points. Like if you have 3 different points, say we have an example of, I think you will find similar question in your assignment as well. So consider these 2 chromosomes, and I've chosen 3-point crossover. So I'll be having something like this. So what we can do over there, like it is up to you to decide the strategy. Here we can do an alternating strategy. Like instead of swapping everywhere, we just select alternative ones. So the first ones we will leave unchanged. The second ones which I have highlighted in yellow, you exchange these things. So you come up with 1, 0. We exchange the second one. So 1, 0, 1 comes up here. The third one will leave unchanged. The fourth one again will exchange. This is one strategy of doing it. We will leave unchanged and the other one changes. Or you can come up with some other way where you say whether to exchange it or not. I'll decide that also randomly. Like previously one, I think Mr. Sanjay told, like we'll flip a coin and we get heads or tails. So you can do that as well. You at every point when you come up with this particular sort, you will flip a coin. If you get a head, you exchange it. If you get a tail, you do not exchange. Again, go to the next section, flip a coin, get a head, exchange. Otherwise, do not exchange. You can do that way. Like these strategies you have to choose depending on your problem. Like some problems might get worked with some particular strategies, others might not. So it depends on your application.
So one more question I have is, you chose all parents, not all parents, all four. What should I say? We had the initial population of 4, right? Is that correct? In the previous example.
Previous example, initial population was 8.
Not this one. You went back to the.
That was 4. Yeah, that was 4.
Correct, right? Then out of these all 4, you made one string, one
Yes.
chromosome.
Yes.
So this is normal way to do it, is it? Or we?
You can actually tweak it, like you can actually change it the other way around. But I'll tell you one, like if you can, here if you have 4 variables, you can use 4 different chromosomes instead of 1 chromosome.
Okay. Then we allowed to mate any 2 randomly, or
that there it will be a problem. Like if you are choosing that particular way, only you can mate X with another X, like X1 with another X1, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Because if you use X1 and X2, they might actually be 2 different. Say in general, X1 could be temperature, X2 could be pressure or something like that. You cannot mate temperature with pressure or something like that.
Okay.
So you do, if you use a single chromosome, you kind of have, for this particular case, when you are merging all of them, you need to have them in appropriate units. So you do not use temperature and pressure directly. You kind of have some kind of non-dimensional value of temperature, non-dimensional value of pressure, and then use these values inside.
Okay. So this part is already covered in week 2, because I have not been to week 2 yet. Or if it is not, it will be covered.
It is. It is covered in week 2.
Okay.
Actually, the main objective of this session is to help you in solving the assignments.
Okay.
So I'm just focusing on the problems that are required to solve the assignments.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is 2, and previously discussed, we can also have the multi-point crossovers where you can actually choose among anything like 3, 4, 5 and use your strategy. The next step is essentially your mutation operator. See, even when you do crossover, it's like essentially you're expanding your search space. Selection will kind of identify which are good, which are bad. But what if you reach to some local optima? How can you get out of it? That is where mutation comes into picture. Mutation helps in keeping the diversity within the population. Unless you have some diversity, the filter cannot work.
Yeah.
What you do in mutation for a binary coded gene is like if you have 1, you convert it to 0. If you have 0, you convert it to 1.
So mutation is kind of giving a equal distribution.
Sorry, giving
a distribution. What is normal distribution?
Like just to compare it in evolution, it's like getting some new species or something like that. Say there are all. It's like if you have some deers or something like white tigers. You have heard about white tigers. In nature, you usually find the normal ones, but rarely there are some white tigers. That happens essentially because of some change in the genomic sequence inside, or maybe you can consider some atomic bomb, like if you consider nuclear explosion, there the people they have some certain changes that happen inside. These events are very rare to occur, but because they are present, they give some new features.
Okay.
They won't be giving new, like it is kind of exploring this. You are kind of exploring the search space, but this is a kind of a sudden shift. By chromosomal match, you can go only up to a certain extent.
So we can do both, is it?
Yeah, you do. Actually, you do both of them. Yes.
Okay. Also, another question: can we pick just one? If you don't, can we just pick crossover and
if you just pick crossover,
discard mutation?
Yeah, usually what happens, mutation, as you see, I'll be explaining the next example. So mutation, even if you choose, you just won't change 0 to 1 every time. That also you do with some probability, and that probability will be usually very low.
Okay.
So unless you have gone through loops of sufficient number of iterations, actually mutation would not have happened. Say like if you have chosen mutation probability of 10%, it's like you need to go at least to 10 or 20 generations for one mutation to happen.
Yeah.
So usually mutation will be less, crossover will more likely to happen, but it depends on your like if you want convergence to happen much faster. If you do not have mutation, it might converge to some local solution. So usually use mutation, but with a lower probability. You can actually go with one of them, but it depends on the problem. Some problems might actually give you solutions, but most of them require mutation.
Okay.
Again, we have two forms of mutation over here, like local and global. So just to explain the difference between both of them, we'll consider this particular example. 1, 0, 0. If you have a chromosome like this, local mutation is like similar to the previous was single point crossover. You randomly identify one site and then you decide whether to mutate or not. That is global mutation. Local mutation. Say, for example, in this, but first thing is I have to choose my mutation probability. Usually, the mutation probability will be decided on the number of your depends on your population size and number of variables you have in your chromosome. For this particular example, say if I have chosen 0.1 as my mutation probability, like only 10% of the time I will mutate, otherwise I will not. To check whether I've reached this particular thing, I will generate one random number. Say if I got a value of say 0.2, 0.2 is greater than 0.1. So this is similar to the previous one we discussed about uniform distribution. So it's like saying you have numbers between 0 and 1 and you have chosen a threshold of 0.1. So only if you generate some random numbers which fall within this range, then the probability of happening that event is 10%. So you want to do mutation only if the random number generated is less than 0.1. If it is greater than 0.1, it falls in this particular scenario which you would like to avoid. You just do not mutate. So that operator will just become an identity operator. Whatever comes in, it just goes without untouched. Like it just remains as it is. So when my probability is if my random number is 0.2, which is greater than 0.1, so I will not just mutate. So I'll just pass it as it is. If just in case, like you can when you generate random number, you can get any number. If you get say 0.05, then you essentially 0.05 is less than 0.1, which means it falls in this particular region. So it is in the zone of your mutation, so you actually mutate it. Where to mutate? You again generate another number based on the length of the string. Say if my random number is like if I generate between 0 and 9, and if I get something like 3, then I choose this is my 0, 1, 2, 3. A third location, I'll choose this value. Since the probability like 0.05, my random number is less than the mutation probability, I'll change this to 0. So my new string will be 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1. This is local mutation. But then you can also have something called global mutation. The idea behind the same is here if you see, we are kind of restricting to only one particular location, which means at max we can only change one variable. I mean, the previous case, the previous example where we have x1, x2, x3, x4, in this particular case, when you have this chromosome, when you choose one particular site and you apply the mutation operator, most likely at max only one of these x1, x2, x3, x4 will be changed. This might not be suitable for all problems, so we come up with something called a global mutation, where you kind of go through each and every bit and check whether and generate one random number and check whether it is less than the mutation probability or not. If it is, then you change it, otherwise it's not. This way you can kind of ensure that at least in the framework allows you to kind of modify all 4 variables at once. Just to give an example, I will go to this one example. Yeah, let us consider this example. Maybe I'll wait for a couple of minutes for you to go through the question. So like my binary string is given and I have chosen my probability of mutation to be 30% or 0.3. So I generate random numbers. The numbers I generate should be equal to the length of chromosome. What will be the mutated string? Just populated one table here. You see like these are your sites and these are your random numbers generated and your probability of mutation is 0.3. So the first thing is essentially see what are random variables are less than 0.3. It's like 0.2, 0.05 and then again 0.2. It is these variables that you would like to change and all others remain untouched. So for these variables you kind of switch between, you kind of convert 1 to 0 and 0 to 1. So oops, I hope this is clear. So 1, third one and eighth one will be changed. So you'll be coming like 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0, 0. This is your final mutated string. And then the final operator we will be discussing is a survivor operator. So if we can just go through the algorithm once. We have gone through all of them. Like solution representation is essentially the one we have converted into the binary format. That is your solution representation. You first decide what is your length of chromosome depending on your precision, and then you come up with it. Say previously when we have decided, like if you know you are measuring temperature and you know you can measure it only up to 0.1 degree centigrade, then based on that you know, and then you decide the bounds for the temperature. Like if you say human temperature, it will be somewhere between 35 and 40 or 41. So if you are saying human temperature, say 35 to 42, and your precision is say 1 degree centigrade, from this you come up with your length of chromosome. So length of chromosome will be like we have seen previously. You can use this particular formula where your length of precision is 2 minus 35 by the precision required. This will give you the length of chromosome you need to use, and once you decide your length of chromosome, then you use again this particular formula to come up with your binary strings, as we have done previously. Use the decision variable, like use this particular formula to come up with your actual value of the variable. Once you get the actual value, you kind of use you get this binary string. This is your solution representation. That is the first step of your computational algorithm. Next is the maximum t. This usually vary depending on your application. Like you just see whether the solution is converging or not, and then you gradually increase it. Next one, initializing the random population. So instead of one solution, you kind of come up with multiple solutions, and then you initialize your population. The next step is evaluating objective constraints and assigning fitness. Say for the example I've told, like human temperature, if your objective is like getting some optimum temperature in terms of you have to, for the temperature case might not be a good example. So we can have another example, like you just have a function f of x equal to x square. This is your objective function. So first step is you generate random population, is like you generate x. I'm just using superscript to denote the sample number. So you continuously generate some population. Say if my population size is 8, I generate 8 numbers. Next step is I use the decision decoded value and then convert it into binary. Once I convert them into binary, then I'll with this before converting, I can actually use these x values to obtain f of x. That will be my this p of this step, this particular step, evaluating objective constraints and assigned fitness. Once I get those values, next I'll go into the iteration. I'll do the selection operator. Here you have to choose whether you're going to use tournament selection or the fitness proportionate selection. I think I forgot to mention that fitness proportionate selection, if you can see over here, here we are always choosing the ones, like you see the most likely ones are the ones having maximum area, which means the ones which are having maximum fitness value. So this particular kind of formulation is suitable only for maximization problems. So if you are using fitness proportionate selection, it's your problem should be formulated in a way that your objective function is to maximize something. But if you see in the tournament selection, that is not the case. You can actually use it in both of these scenarios. You can actually use it for either maximization or a minimization. Fitness proportion is not the case. If you just want to do some minimization problem and you want to use a fitness proportionate, then you have to use the duality principle we have discussed before. Can one of you recollect the duality principle?
I am not able to.
Yeah, okay, fine. So duality principle essentially says if you have one function, so this is what I meant by duality principle. If you want
Yeah,
to
okay, I got it.
you just
That-
negate it and
Yeah.
so fitness proportionate works only for maximization. So you want to minimize something, so you just negate it. I mean, you just put minus f of x and apply the algorithm. But for tournament selection, that doesn't actually need to be done. You can actually do it inside the tournament selection itself. That is your selection operator. So once you're done with the selection operator, then comes your variation operators, the crossover and mutation we have discussed. You can either choose the single point, multi-point, depending on your number of variables. If you have less number of variables, single point would be sufficient. As your dimensionality of the problem increases, you can go with other options as well. Once your mutation is done, you get after your crossover and mutation operators, you get the final another solution. These we are calling it the offsprings. After you are getting the offsprings, again you apply the survival. So if you see, we are operating this twice. First one is to populate the mating pool. To obtain some, like we get solutions only from better solutions. Like out of all the possible samples in the population, we choose only the ones that are good, or choose the mating pool with more proportion of good solutions, and then use them to generate next generation of population. But after getting these offsprings, again from the offsprings we again apply another selection operator. Here we have two strategies. This survival is, again we have two different schemes. One is mu lambda scheme, I mean mu hyphen or mu lambda. So what you essentially do over here is in the first mu lambda strategy, you have the parent as well as the offsprings. So you take both parent and offsprings, sort them in the particular order. Say if you have a minimization problem, sort them in the ascending order and select the top. Say if your population size is n, you select the top n. Like if your population size is 8, you select the top 8. I hope you got that.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the second strategy, what you can do, like previously when we discussed crossover and mutation or even the selection operator, you kind of, when selecting the mating pool, you can randomly generate numbers till how many times you want. Like you can generate actually offsprings more than the number of population, initial parent offsprings. Like if your parent is 8, you can generate solutions offsprings of like 8, 10, 16, 20, any number you want. So in the second strategy, what we do, we use the same parents, but we just not generate 8 offsprings, we generate more number of offsprings. Say like 9, 10, 20 or something like that. And after getting 20 offsprings, then we sort them in ascending order and select the top 8. That will go to the next generation. That is another strategy we will be using. Like, you can actually choose any one of them. That will be the survival step. And then once we get to the next generation, this loop again repeats. Again, we apply selection, variation, and survival, and this goes on till you either reach your limit on till you reach your convergence criteria, which will be the maximum number of generations. If you can go through the lecture videos, there are actually some nice animations of different functions. professor has described about various standard functions you use for this. Like one of the challenges we discussed previously, like non-differentiable functions and constraints. So he has taken some problems like Rosenbrock function, Abel function. These functions are essentially the standard functions which you test for any of these optimization algorithms to decide whether they'll not converging to some of the local optima. He has shown how the solutions move from, say, to just give you a brief idea. Let us just consider one multimodal function. Say you have some function like this, and your objective is to maximize this function. So, like, to just give you a graphical understanding of it, the first step is generating some random population. So when we are generating some random population, we are essentially, say, some 8 points are generated at random. So maybe 6, 7, 8. These are my 8 populations, so you essentially have 8 points corresponding to them. These are the fitness values. Then once you apply the selection operator, as you can see here, this particular value, like my objective is to maximize this. Let me just write over here. My objective is in maximizing this particular objective function. This is some y equal to f of x that I need to maximize. So you can see this particular value has more probability of getting selected in the selection operator. And you can see like this particular thing is the minimum, so this is least likely to occur. This is most likely to occur. So when you go to the next generation of solutions, what you usually encounter is most of the solutions after applying the crossover essentially, like if you take this particular, like in the mating pool, if you choose this and this particular thing, what happens during crossover is like you essentially taking between this and this, you get some value between both of them, say this particular value. So it will just go and your next generation of solution will come over here. So like this particular point has moved over here. Mutation, if you can think of it graphically, it's more like if you take this particular value, you just go to some other location, say this particular location. It is like you're just spanning the entire space. Now the main advantage of these kind of evolutionary techniques is like, in order to ideally obtain your maximum, you need to calculate all f of x for all these values, for all values of x, like this all these values, and then obtain f of x and then sort it and then identify the maximum value. Instead of that, you are using a different strategy where you are kind of randomly selecting some points, obtaining some function, applying a filter, identifying the best possible solutions, using them, kind of interpolating to explore the search space even further. So like after 10 iterations or something, what happens, sorry, see after 10 iterations or something, most likely all solutions will come somewhat closer to this. All your 8 solutions will somewhat come closer to over here instead of any one of these like somewhere in between intermediate stages. What happens is like some solutions will come here, some solutions will come here, some solutions will come here, like they will be in the local optimas. As you go further and further towards more and more number of generations, all of them will be converging towards the global optima. That is usual expectation. Now let us come to the next aspect of parameter tuning. So as we have seen, there are so many parameters. Like first step is in choosing the decision variables. Once you have chosen the decision variables, this is the one, like the person who is, like the problem at hand is by an expert. The expert can tell you what the decision variable should be. Like if you consider the problem for a traffic problem, your decision variables can be the route, mode of transport or something like that. Or if you have some engineering problem, say you need to maximize heat transfer or something, you can actually choose. You have so many parameters, like if you are having airflow, you need to decide what velocity the flow should be. Like if you are using some pipe for the flow, then what the diameter of the pipe should be. These are some parameter decision variables. Once these are chosen by the expert, our parameter lies in choosing the L value, I mean the chromosomal length value. you can actually vary this. If your chromosomal length is too short, then you might not actually converge to the actual value. This is because of the problem of discretization we have spoken about previously. So the professor has explained about how the effect of L on the simulation lies around. Like if you can have some variables like this, if you have chosen a lower value of L, you are kind of discretizing this function into some domain. So instead of the actual value something here, you can at max obtain only this. This cannot be obtained just because of the way you have discretized this. Only if you increase L, you will be able to come up to this. If you do not increase L, then you are kind of stuck into one of the other points. But as you can see, like if you are increasing L, you are essentially increasing your string size, so your computational effort will be increased. So that is the trade-offs you need to consider. So the video explains about the other aspects of how the solutions converge depending on L. Like if you increase L, whether the solutions converge much faster or much slower. Usually it happens like the solutions converge much faster. I mean, you require lesser number of generations for this convergence to happen. Yeah, I hope this pretty much explains the stuff. Like you may be able to solve the assignments much quicker. You have any other doubts relating to assignment 1 or 2 that you would like me to explain, or any other doubts regarding the videos past 2 weeks?
No, actually, I was not prepared. It was my mistake. I should have utilized your time.
Yeah, no issues. Anyway, we are going to have this session in the next week as well, like for the coming weeks.
Okay.
Every day on every week on Saturday 5 to 7.
Sure. Thank you.
Or maybe if you want me to solve some other problems, I can just solve one complete problem. Like we can just take the example of f of x equal to x square. Just go through the entire algorithm once. That might help you in your week 2 assignment.
Sure. So this PDF will be shared there, available to us.
Yeah, I can share Google Slide as well as this particular PDF. I mean, this particular file I am writing.
Okay.
Like you wouldn't be having this handwriting stuff, but the text one will be there.
Okay.
If you want a handwritten one as well, I can share that as well.
Yeah, please share, sir.
Yeah, sure. Okay, then let us go to one quick example then, just to get an idea of how the entire algorithm works, and then we'll wind up the session. You just take one simple example. Consider f of x equal to x square, and my x is between 0 to say 1, or sorry, or we'll just take the simple one, 1 to 2. I know my global minima is at, I mean, in this particular domain, my minima occurs at x equal to 1. I'm calling it x star, but let's just solve it. So first step is in randomly generating the numbers. So how do you go about randomly generating the numbers? Is either you can use random number tables, or you can, if you are familiar with Excel or any of the functions, Python, MATLAB or anything, you can just use the default rand function available, which gives you the random numbers. So if you want to generate, say between 1 and 2, to generate random numbers between 1 and 2, all the default rand functions will give you generation between 0 and 1. Any uniform random generator number will give you between 0 and 1. If you're using Python, you actually have options between any two different things, but in general, it will be between 0 and 1. So if you want to convert from 0, 1 to 1, 2, say you generate a random number u that comes between 0 and 1, and then you scale it, kind of just add 1 to it. So this will be in the domain 1 to 2. That will be a random number between 1 to 2. So we generate some numbers between 1 to 2, say something like 1.1, 1.3, 1.5. Let's just take a population size of 4. And 1.4. If these are my some of them can be closer to 2 as well, say 1.6 or 1.8. I'm just giving you some numbers, but when you actually generate the random number, you might actually get some different numbers. So if suppose if you got these particular numbers, how the next step is, how do I convert them into binary? So again, now we need to know what precision is required. Say if the precision required is, this is again depend upon the problem, and the expert has to tell you like what precision you are requiring. Yeah, if you require a precision of say 0.1, then you need to again come up with say what should be the value of L. L will be log to 1 plus your domain 2 minus 1 by 2 power, sorry, is my screen frozen or you are able to see? Hello? Am I
It's
audible?
scrolling.
It's scrolling, right? Yeah.
Scrolling.
Yeah.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So if you can see here, you can just use this particular formula to come up with your value of the chromosomal length you will be requiring. So that will be around, here it is 2 minus 1 by 0.1. So this gives you, does anyone of you have a calculator? 1 second. Log 1 plus,
1 plus 10, right?
yeah,
Log 11 base
yeah,
2.
log 11 to the base 2. It's around 3.46 or something. 11 is approximately 2q or something, so 3.46. You can just consider 4 as your chromosomal length. So if you are choosing 4 as your chromosomal length, then you need to kind of convert all these values, like from 1.1, say we'll just take one sample. So if you are considering 1.8, now I need to convert 1.6. Now I need to convert this to binary. So how do I go about it? Is first convert 1.6. It's like you're converting from space 1 comma 2, x belongs to 1 comma 2. Now you have select chromosomal length of 4, which means this spans from 0 to 2 power 4 minus 1, like 0 to 15. So you need to find the mapping between 1 comma 2 to 0 comma 15. So if you are having 1.62, 0, 15, what is that corresponding number here that gives you that particular value? Can you just come up with that number?
15 divided by 2 into no, there's a formula, right?
Yeah, you can come up with the formula, or you can just,
Okay, this is a linear.
it's just a
that
linear
line
line
section.
kind of, it's just the line kind of thing. You can use the same thing. So this comes around 9 or 9.
Yeah.
So you essentially have, so 1.6 is essentially mapped to 9.
9.
So you need to convert 9 to binary. So you just convert it to binary. It's like 8 plus 1, 2 power 0, 2 power 1, 2 square, 2 cube, 1, 0, 0, 1. This is your binary format for 1.6. Let's just consider another number, say 1.3.
Okay.
1.3 will get mapped to 15 into 0.3. It's 24.5. Okay, great. We'll just round it off to 4 or something. That gets, if it gets mapped to 4, that is essentially 2 square. You have 0, 1, 0, 0. So just I think we are running out of time, so we'll just quickly see. So if these are two of my solutions, so I have 1, 0, 0, 1 and 0, 1, 0, 0, and there are other two solutions. Similarly, you will get the other two for like 1.1 and 1.3. After this, the next step is your evaluating the fitness of all of this. So when I have 1.1, just for this part, 1.6, your fitness function is 2.56, and 1.8 you have some 3.24. Similarly, for if this is for 1.1, you will have 1.21, and for 1.3 you will have some 1.69. This is your fitness. Like I have considered my objective function to be x square, so these are your fitness values.
Sorry, how did you get the fitness values?
Depending on your objective function. The objective function we have chosen is f of x equal to x square.
Okay.
So you really don't need to have this binary representation to get fitness. Once you get the fitness values, the next step is you do the selection operator. So for our sake, I am considering we are using tournament selection with k equal to 2, I mean binary tournament selection. So we select two of them at random. Say I'm just labeling this as A, B, C and D as my four solutions. Then when I'm selecting two, I've chosen two at random, say A and C and B and D. Like I need four solutions, so I need to do this 4 times. So then the second time, if suppose I got B and C and A and D, now we'll apply the tournament selection. So if I'm choosing A and C, what will be my object is to minimize. So what will be my output of the operator? Just writing one table for your clarity. Yeah, these are my fitness values. So if I am selecting A and C, and my objective is to minimize the fitness value function value, C will be the option. So C will come here. Between B and D,
D.
Yeah. Similarly, between B and C, you will get C, and A and D, you will get D. So this is what you call mating pool. Now, once you form the mating pool, the next step is, if you can see in the algorithm, after selection of the mating pool, you do this is the step we are right now. Selection operator. The next step is applying the variation. We got the fittest ones. Now we do the variation. Like we do the crossover and mutation. For that we need to, like from the mating pool, we need to select the parents. So we'll select two at a random. So anyway, here we have only C and D. We don't have any other option. So we select C and D. Okay. I think we didn't do the binary form. Okay, no issues. So for the C, let us just use this example. Instead of C and D, we can actually get A and B as well. So let's consider the case where we are using A and B. I think this is clear, right? This is just for the sake of the procedure. I'm just taking A and B. So for my A, it is 1001 and B, it is 0100. Now I am applying single point crossover. For single point crossover, my first step is to choose a location at which I want to do the crossover. So for that, what I do, again, generate a random number that is between 0 to 3. I get some number, say I'm getting 2 or something. Then I go to, like, this is 0, 1, 2, 3. After 2, I select a split. And then what I do is essentially swap both of them. I swap them and then I get 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1. So like essentially the one over the top just comes over the bottom. These are my offsprings. So again, what I do from this, I'll convert this binary form to decimal. This essentially comes like 2 cube 8, 1 plus 4, 5. And from 8 and 5, I convert it to the actual values of x. Like this is my decoded value. And from decoded value, I convert to x using the previous mapping we have defined here. Like using the same mapping, we just use it in the reverse way. Like 0, 8, 15, 1 and 2, and this is my x. Today I get x minus 1 by 8 is essentially your 1 by 15. From this, if you solve, you get x to be 1 plus 8 by 15. Comes around 1.5. So this is my x value, like 1.5. Similarly, you do for the other one. That is like x equal to 1 plus, if you just put instead of 8, 5, it will be 5 by 15. It is 1.3 or something. This will be 1.3. This is your decision decoded value, and from there you get x, and from again here you'll calculate f of x. Your f of x will be like 2.25 and 1.69. Again you apply the survivor. Now comes again the next step after applying the variation, this is crossover. The next step of crossover is mutation. Now you choose a probability, mutation probability of say 0.2 or some 0.1. Like usually it's like this. If you have more number of variables, you kind of increase your mutation probability. Like if you have one variable, you kind of choose 0.1 or less than that for your mutation. Once the mutation probability is chosen, you again generate a random number. Say if the number I got is like 0.3 or something. So do I do the mutation or not?
If you get 0.1, 0.3,
If I get 0.3 when my probability is 0.1.
you won't. It's a maximum problem or minimum?
No, mutation, yeah, now let us come. No, actually, even if it is maximization or minimization, for mutation to work, it doesn't need, like, it doesn't depend upon whether it is minimization or maximization. During selection is when you decide whether it is minimization or maximization. For mutation, it's just like, do I need to change it or not? It is just a binary decision. It's like, you change it or you do not change.
Okay, so based on what method we choose? Right now we're not sure which method.
Right now we are saying my mutation probability is only 10%.
Okay.
And I generated a number which is 0.3.
So don't have mutation.
So you just don't mutate. So you just take the same values as it is. So these values will just go as it is. From there you get f of x. Again you apply the, now we have discussed about two strategies of survivor strategies, like basically new lambda scheme, where you can use actually, here we have used, you can see here we have generated four offsprings. Like use these four along with the parents. Like these are my parent. This is what you call parent. And after crossover and mutation, you get another four solutions. Say if A, B, C, D are my parents, and A dash, B dash, C dash, D dash are my offsprings. This is after crossover and mutation, after variation. Now what you do, again you have two strategies. First strategy is kind of, you calculate fitness for all of these functions, and then you sort them. Like my objective is to minimize, so I sort them in ascending order, select the top four. Those top four will be my solution. So here, if just for the sake parents, if my values are like previously the values are 2.56, 3.24, 2.56, 3.24, 1.21 and 1.69. My offsprings are something like 1.5, 1.3, so you are getting something like 2.25, 1.69. Say if by 2 for the other two times, if I am getting something like 1.44 and 2.56. If I am using mu plus lambda strategy, I need to sort all of this combined in ascending order. So it will be like 1.21, 1.44, 1.69, 1.69. Like your population size, I am representing by n is 4. This is your population size. So you just select only these four. Only this four will go to the next generation. This is mu plus lambda strategy. The other strategy you can use is, why do you have to generate just 4 offsprings? Instead of 4, you generate more. You just generate 8 or something like that. So now you'll be having A dash, B dash, C dash, D dash. And again, you will use A, B, C, D. Again, operate the crossover and mutation. Since it is a stochastic process, like now you'll be getting new random numbers. So you will generate new solutions. So you'll be getting something like E dash, dash, G dash, and H dash. So here, from these, you select the best 4. Like best 4 in the sense, not actually, like you again sort, like depending on your, for our case it is minimization, so I'll select the top 4 in the ascending order. If it is maximization, you just select the last 4 in the after sorting them in ascending order. So after selecting this, we'll go to the next generation, and then the loop again repeats. It's like again you get these 4 solutions, you again do from the beginning. You again apply the tournament selection to get the mating pool. Once you get the mating pool, you apply the crossover operator. Once you do the crossover, you go to mutation. After mutation is done, you again come to this strategy, whether to use either this or this, and then you proceed. Like this, you iterate till the maximum number is of till you are required, like 200 generations, 100 generations, whatever is the requirement. Hope this is clear. Have any doubts?
No, I need to go through
Video.
again.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay then we'll close the session. We'll meet again next week.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.